Welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio coming live from the new studio. If you guys haven't seen the new studio, head over to YouTube. Check it out. Huge shout out to Lundy, Lunderjack Productions, and Jay Marsh for making this happen. So we're going to have the pod back up on YouTube. Some really exciting stuff coming in the next couple of weeks and months on YouTube as well as the podcast. So head over that and subscribe. As far as the coursework goes, the fitting with today's guest that we're going to be announcing the start of the intake for the next semester of performance nutrition. This is a 10-week course that dives into all the intricacies of really wielding nutrition as a means of improving athletic performance in the gym, on the field. Phil Smith, can't say enough good things about him. There's not a pro athlete that I consult with that I don't loop Phil in on the nutrition side of things when it comes to relaying complex concepts in a very digestible, pun intended, digestible way that yields real-time results. Phil is, in my opinion, one of the, if not the best in the world when it comes to performance nutrition. We're very lucky to have him teaching our performance nutrition course, which is up for sale now today, actually the first day of the sale. So do be the first. Space is limited. Very excited for that. So www.pre-script.com. Performance nutrition certification coming at you live. Believe registration closes in a month or two. So yeah, we're very excited to have that course back up and running. Make sure you go ahead and secure your seat. Today's guest, Dan Garner, fellow Canadian. Dan has risen to popularity of late, being quite literally in the corner of the best athletes in the world when it comes to managing their nutrition and, more importantly, hydration and weight cutting protocols in the UFC. We dive in depth and detail on this. Sorry about that. In today's episode, we talk about his process in safely and effectively cutting weight while mitigating and managing systemic stress, decreasing inflammation, and improving overall health. Most recently, Dan's success has come on the backs of the success of Sean O'Malley. I don't know if you guys are UFC fans or not. Definitely been something that I've been following closer, as I am a huge fan of Dan Garner and watching him do his thing with some of the best fighters in the world and having them get tremendous results. Really fun to watch, really cool to hear his process. So if you guys like it, head over, shoot Dan a message. Awesome guy, very smart, collaborates with some of the best in the industry as well. Him and Andy Galpin have been working on something. He talks about what's coming down the pipe for him, both on the professional athlete side of things and on the business side. Really cool to see smart coaches doing exciting things that impact the industry in a positive way. So can't say enough good things about Dan. It's a huge shout out for coming on the show and sharing his brilliance with us. If you guys want, as mentioned, we're up on the YouTube channel. So we're going to be cutting up some specific clips. One specifically that I really enjoyed was his talk about stress, stomach acid, and digestion, how that's like a big rock. We'll cover that on the episode. But if we wanted to see sort of live topical clips, we're going to be downloading those or uploading those onto the YouTube channel. So I believe it's on mine for now. So if you want to search the Muscle Doc on YouTube, you'll just hit the subscribe button. You'll get all the stuff for RX Radio coming through the pipe. Some crazy guests coming up this month. Just confirmed Mike Israetel on the show in a couple of weeks. We got Juji, a Dr. Adil Khan. Who else have we? We've been talking to Fuad. We're going to get Fuad on the show. And if there's anyone you want to see, shoot me a message. Tag them on Instagram. Let them know that we're coming for them. So really exciting stuff coming on the podcast. Again, Prescript Performance Nutrition Certification course, 10 weeks. Phil Smith. You get free access to Prescript Collective. You're getting 6 labs a week, plus our Discord community channel. Everything you need to know about improving performance with nutrition. Again, I could probably talk about for 45 minutes just about that course alone. But head on over if you're interested, www.pre-script.com, performance nutrition. Secure your seat. As far as today, Dan Garner on the ones and twos. Really appreciate Dan lending his brilliance, and see if we can't get him up the road for an in-person episode while I'm here in Toronto. So guys, enjoy the episode. Leave us your feedback. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, all that fun stuff. And we'll see you on the other side. Lundy, hit it.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Quiet on the set, please. It's me in my apartment by myself. Well, welcome, Dan Garner, to RX Radio podcast. You're my canary down the coal mine, sir. As I think I travel and do a bunch of stuff and deal with a bunch of people, and I think, I don't know if I could do this another day. I just go on your Instagram and go, you know what? Dan's still kicking. So there's more left in the tank for me, man. How you doing?
Hell yeah, man. There's more left in the tank for everybody. I've been a big believer in people don't get tired, they lose their purpose. If you have a strong enough purpose, you're always going to find the energy to get something done. It's like the crazy example could be like if your family was in trouble, would you get fatigued on the way to go find them? Nope, you never would. And I think that if somebody has a high enough purpose, you're never going to run out of energy. So a huge part of like finding motivation or finding the energy to do something is just setting the right goal. If you know who you are and what you want, it's kind of hard to get tired. So I've always kind of had that mentality of take time to set the right goals. And that's what kind of leads me to the canary in the coal mine kind of situation where let's just keep going, baby. Let's rock.
Well, you've had a crazy, I mean, I've been following you for some time now. And it's funny that the idiom of, you know, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success, you know, to go from like following the Instagram page to all of a sudden like, wait a minute, there he is. Like, oh, you're watching a UFC fight and he's like got the belt around his waist and you're like, the guy from London? You're like, yeah, motherfucking right. The guy from London. That's right.
Yeah, right.
How has in your mind kind of like the last 10 years, like where you're at now, did it come quickly? Was this always the plan? Like you're the guy, you're the way every time, you know, your athletes have an opportunity to talk about their weight cuts in their camps. Like it's really telling to see how much endorsement you're getting from some of the best fighters in the world. And it really goes to the level of attention and detail. Like, was this always the trajectory for you? Like, I want to get into fight sports. I want to, you know, help in the weight cut process, which is arguably, you know, from a safety perspective, one of the most important aspects of the sport in itself. Was this always on your radar?
It was always on my radar, man. It was always a dream of mine. And those things, yeah, it's funny, those 10 plus year overnight success things that happen where someone's like, hey, wait, what? You're lucky to do this. Like, it's not that lucky if you do something 7 days a week for over a decade, right? But the truth was that I was actually, when I got out of high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do in high school. I was one of the guys who got terrible grades because I didn't know what I wanted yet. So I ended up getting a machinist job right out of high school because it was just there. It was a trade job that I could do and make decent money in. I was there. And then I was already training for a very long time at that point. I started weightlifting when I was 14. And then I had already built up a knowledge base at that point because I was like 20 or, you know, in between 17, 18 or so when I got into the machine shop. But that was like 4 years of as a teenager reading articles every day, looking at these weird old fossils called magazines every day, being on another fossil called a forum every day. I did all that stuff back in the day, man. You know the deal. So I accumulated a knowledge base for myself, but I suppose didn't know what I wanted out of life yet. Ended up in the machine shop, ended up also doing a lot of the meal planning and training for the guys in the machine shop. So it's like my calling was already right there in front of my face, but I had the cloak of security. I had this thing and I was scared. And then the best thing in the world that could have ever happened to me was half the machine shop got laid off because the company wasn't doing too well and I was axed. So overnight I was gone. I saw it as an opportunity to do what I actually wanted to do in life. And I've just been working nonstop, kind of like a maniac ever since then, because I'm going to die before I go back into the machine shop. That's like a huge motivator for me is I'm not going back. So I have been working every single day since then. And I was a huge fan of MMA way before the machine shop. I was watching Pride events from Japan, Dream events, jungle fights in Brazil, TKO in Montreal when it was still around. And then, of course, the UFC. I was all over the map with MMA, but also just striking, like watching Glory Kickboxing, watching K1. I was all about it. And then and I was just a fan forever. So then when I got into training, I had to start from the bottom. And I knew I wanted to be an educator and I knew I wanted to work with athletes. So a real point of inspiration for me was actually Charles Poliquin, the late and great Charles Poliquin, my man. Yeah, another fellow Canadian of ours. He's not with us anymore, but did I ever take a lot of inspiration from that guy because I saw someone who was a good educator. I saw someone who worked with athletes, and it was like my first time being exposed to someone referencing work. It was like that. I wasn't just a guy at the gym talking to me or a magazine article from Jay Cutler that I was checking out. It was someone actually talking about this study did X, Y, and Z. And I was like, okay, that's like my North Star. That's where I want to be at. as I was just watching that guy do his thing. And then I get into Gold's Gym, and that it all kind of kicked off from there. So 10 years later, I've worked with athletes in 15 different professional sports at this point in time, and I've collected a lot of world titles along the way, most recently being this UFC one we're talking about right now with Sean O'Malley.
Yeah. So how does that, I mean, I don't know, there's a lot of different avenues I want to take on this. And I think one thing that's true with people who, at least in my experience, talking with people at your level who work with world-class athletes, is if you were to go back and think of your first athlete that you worked with at a high level, and I'm sure maybe to a certain degree, you might still get nerves or excitement around, the prospect of working with a new athlete. Like, you kind of understand the paradigm that they've been operating off of. You see the skill that they have, and you go, well, yeah, there's a ton of room for improvement here. But if you were to go back and look at the first athlete, like, holy shit, like, this guy is a big deal, or girl is a big deal, and look at your processes and procedures then and compare them to now, like, is there a comparison? How would you, like, what are some of the maybe the hard lessons learned from, like, just starting out with your first athlete to obviously having what seems to be a fairly, like, I don't want to say foolproof, but you nail the mark every time? Like, what's changed in the time that you've kind of been doing this?
Yeah, I think that you're not going to rise to the level of the situation. You're going to fall to the level of your systems, right? So over time, you have this block, and then as years pass, you chip away at that block until you form this system that is uniquely yours, that is repeatable. And in the beginning, you make mistakes. Like, luckily, I made a lot of my mistakes working with general population in Gold's Gym in London, Ontario. To be frank, when you first get in the industry, I probably owe some people their money back. Like, when you're a trader first getting in, you're learning on the job in a lot of ways, because, like, certification processes are so basic and they don't really tell you a whole lot about a whole lot. So then you end up kind of working through certain trial and error, developing your own system, reading every day, watching lectures every day, going into debt, attending seminars for a freaking long time, until you're known as the guy who gets results. Results speak louder than anything else. That's like, when I first got into the industry, there's three things that help people listen to you almost immediately. If you have a PhD, if you have a phenomenal physique, or if you're a pro athlete. I had none of those things. I had none of those three things. So I knew if I was going to make this name for myself, then I better be the guy who gets the job done every single time. So I placed a huge importance on developing my own unique systems and ensuring that I'm objectively tracking those systems. So that's why I've kind of gravitated towards things that remove my bias and remove my client's bias over time, such as lab work. Lab work has a beautiful way of not giving a shit how you feel about it. You are objectively tracking this process and making sure you're hitting the marks that you need to hit along the way. And then you get to a situation where you get your first pro athlete, and that pressure doesn't go away, but that's how I love to live. High stress equals high reward. When you are in that situation, hell yeah, man, because nothing's like it. Like, when I was, and like other people can kind of attest to, working with someone who has the goal of just becoming generally healthy. Do you want to help that person? Of course you want to help that person. But if you make a mistake, is it worth $10 million? It's not. It's not worth $10 million. If my athlete Sean does not weigh 135.0 on August 18th, then I am in a lot of trouble, because that title fight is not going to happen. And Aljo can actually just pull out at that point, and that fight can be off. Or if the weight cut goes really bad, or the rehydration goes really bad, and he has no gas tank, he has no KO power, his focus is off, let's say there's diarrhea or nausea in the mix, I am at fault for tens of millions of dollars. And this is just kind of one scenario. That doesn't include an NFL player renewing their contract, an MLB player renewing their contract. Like, these things can be worth $100 million, and that's not an exaggeration. So then you have to have this high stress, high reward situation where it pushes you to be the absolute best version of yourself. And in the beginning, you're going to make some mistakes, but over time, like anybody should, I expect my athletes to get better over time, and in turn, they expect me to get better over time. So we grow together, we grow the relationship, we grow the system, we customize it for them over time, and then good things happen.
So you mentioned 15 different sports. I think obviously with your background being heavily influenced by the UFC and kind of your most recent notoriety coming out of mixed martial arts, what unique challenges does the sport of mixed martial arts pose in your arena, right? Like football, is what, a 17-week season, a 32-week off season or whatever, however it ends up being if you don't end up in the playoffs. You're one game a week. It's 12 and a half minutes of total playing time, and that's split between offense and defense, where it's like you got 5 minutes, five fives for a title fight, is something along those lines.
Yep.
Locked in a cage. You're in Vegas or Abu Dhabi or New York City, Madison Square. There is really no sport like it. Like basketball can be like baseball and soccer can be like a hockey or whatever. But what unique challenges in your world does like fighting and fight sports pose for what you do for a living?
There's kind of two brackets of answer that I could give to that. One is the blanket that covers all sports. And then there's another that you can kind of narrow in the specificity towards fighting in and of itself. Like just this year in 2023, I coached Mark Bell to run his first marathon ever. So he ran the Boston Marathon from powerlifter to marathon runner. I coached him through that. Ryan Bader defended his title against one of the best heavyweights of all time, Fedor Emelianenko in Bellator. I coached with John Rahm, who won the Masters golf tournament this year, won it, got the green jacket, baby. And then O'Malley takes this title. The way in which I'm able to kind of just weave in and out of sport to sport to sport is not because I'm skilled in those sports, because I'm not that kind of athlete at all. It's because I understand physiology. And the way in which I operate is actually removing stressors rather than trying to add things. So it's like a big part that I've learned over the years, and to kind of tie back into our conversation regarding the evolution of systems and trial and error over time, is recognizing that you're not smarter than physiology, and that if you just get out of physiology's way, it knows how to adapt better than you know how to force it to adapt. It's like one of the big reasons why I hate terms like biohacking. Like the assumption that you're smarter than a million years of biology is so bizarre to me. I can't believe that anybody could like jump on board with something that even represents that. It makes no sense. You're not biohacking. You're creating an adaptation. Like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense at all. So the way I like to look at physiology is the remover of internal stressors that impact your adaptive capability as a whole. So when I'm looking at, say, blood, urine, saliva, stool analysis, I'm looking at anything that can impact one's adaptive potential. Now, the one thing I've absolutely learned from experience over the course of my career is that you're going to adapt to the degree that you're healthy. Training is only quality training if you can adapt from it. More isn't better. Only better is better. And what determines better is your ability to adapt from it. And both the stimulus and adaptation process in training is governed by immunity. When you are in there creating a stimulus in the gym, you are creating certain purposeful inflammatory effects to take place that's going to create a type of cytokine storm and cytokine response to signal the body, hey, that was a stressful bout that I just went through. I need to create inflammation in this area of the body, because that is going to create the cell signaling to draw hydration to this muscle tissue, to draw amino acids, to draw glucose, to draw the appropriate micronutrients to drive that protein synthetic response. This stimulation in the gym is governed in a huge way by immunity. And so is the adaptive component of it. That signaling process of getting all of those things into the right process is heavily immune system mediated. Like people don't build strength or muscle in the gym. What they do is stimulate strength development or stimulate muscular development in the gym. Everything you do outside of the gym determines whether or not you actually adapt to that stimulus. We've seen people before who are all stimulus and no adaptation. Someone who's all stimulus and no adaptation are the people who do train hard. We see them. They do train hard, but they don't have a lot to show for it. That's all stimulus, no adaptation. Somebody who's all adaptation and no stimulus is like the person that focuses so much on recovery that they forgot to train their ass off. That's that person who's doing way too much breathing and way too much mobility work, but they forgot to train hard. That is the marriage of those two is done through maximum immunity. I've had this thing that I've been working with these athletes for a long time is your ability to remove things that impact adaptive potential is going to be determined by your ability to remove immune insults. So I'm looking at all things objective in physiology through lab work. I'm going to be looking at the vitamin and mineral analysis, your gut microbiome, your brain chemistry, your immune markers, your inflammation, your current resiliency markers associated with injury. I'm going to be looking at as many things as I possibly can so that I'm not adding to your program. What I'm doing is removing things that are currently robbing your adaptive potential. That is like my whole premise around how I'm able to weave in and out of sports is I'm not adding complexity. What I'm doing is removing a root cause problem that's currently holding you back from your current adaptive potential. When I remove that, your quality of training goes up because your return on investment per unit of time spent in the gym is more adaptive. So that's kind of like the bucket answer that I treat a lot of people with. In terms of like dialing things in further for MMA, unique challenges there. It's very difficult to have any form of periodization at all when you're an amateur fighter because you just fight. Like fighting is training, kind of. Like you don't go into camp, you fight. That's really the truth. You're going to take fights when you can get it. Money is scarce at that time. So then you kind of have to take a lot of those fights, and periodization becomes a bigger problem. So like more of like conjugate training becomes more important during those times because you don't have these long bouts where you can slowly, linearly approach someone through a camp, and you kind of have to not get ready, but rather stay ready. In the amateur world, that's a giant problem. But in the pro world, that's when you're dealing with like cartilage repair, inflammation management, improving movement through nutrition, improvement movement through supplementation, brain nutrition in a big way is going to be something that drives performance at that level as well in terms of both brain performance, but also brain recovery after being punched in the face for 5 rounds of 5 minutes. That's another big one. And then, of course, fuel availability for multiple days of training. So you're going to have, say, grappling and then striking, or striking and then strength and conditioning. There's many multiple day sessions to where you need to have maximum focus on the muscle cell, but also the brain cell to get that true world-class performance. So kind of the two big answers there, and we could dive deeper into both of those.
Yeah, I'm really curious on, you talked about the immunity insults and removing things, sort of this addition by subtraction sort of approach. In your experience, what are some of the things that you find yourself removing most often?
There's you would be amazed at how often people have bacterial issues in their gut that just simply go undetected because they've deemed the symptoms as common rather than normal. It is common to have a lot of flatulence. It is common to wake up in the morning with abs, but then go to bed looking like you're pregnant. It's common to have loose stools that you don't always know how to explain. This is super, super common for a lot of populations. But is that normal physiological functioning? No, that's not normal physiology. Your body is not supposed to have a bloated pregnant belly. You're not supposed to have distension. You're not supposed to have discomfort. You're not supposed to have loose stools. These things aren't supposed to happen. And a symptom is nothing more than your body's cry for help. That's the only, it can't speak English. So the only way it can communicate to you is via symptom. But you have to dig deeper because the symptom is never the problem. The symptom is only ever the result of the problem. So that's like a mistake people will make too. It's like, man, I got bloating. I should take some digestive enzymes. That'll work so long as you keep taking digestive enzymes. Because what you're doing is you're suppressing the symptom, but you didn't answer were you bloating in the first place? Why did you need that? It's not normal to require something to help you digest food. There's examples of that across the board. So when I'm looking at something that could be an immune insult, the gut is often a good place, or not a good place. I would say a high percentage place where athletes run into issues. A general population too, but my demographic is largely athletes. I would say probably because they travel a lot. So they eat a lot of different foods. So staying on top of what type of growth could be happening in their body is important. Eating different cultures' foods can be a pretty big shocker. But beyond this, stress by itself, you can have stress-induced hypochlorhydria. This is something that's like super, super well demonstrated in the literature to where your mind can induce a state of hypochlorhydria in your stomach. So hypo, absence of, chlorhydria, stomach acid. You can stress yourself into having low stomach acid. And then this is like, it creates a problem not overnight. So then people never connect the two, but it creates a problem over months at a time, because stomach acid has a lot of important roles. Like number one, it helps break proteins down into peptides and amino acids. So you aren't what you eat. You only are what you eat and actually absorb. So if we're not properly breaking these things down, our assimilation and maximum utilization of these things is going to be suboptimal. So we don't have a proper breakdown of protein. That's the number one thing that hydrochloric acid is going to do. Number two, hydrochloric acid is the trigger to close the pyloric sphincter in the esophagus, or the esophageal sphincter. So you're going to close this esophageal sphincter, which is, if it's left open, you're going to get acid reflux and heartburn. So this is actually one of the biggest symptoms of acid reflux, is not too much acid. It's not enough, because you don't have the stomach acid that is supposed to be the trigger to close this sphincter. That is going to reduce quality of life. It can really actually reduce quality of sleep. A lot of people don't know they're getting heartburn while they're sleeping. You're laying down, you're getting heartburn and impacting sleep quality over time. Again, you don't make these connections because they seem so different, but they're not. And then the third thing that acid does is one of its most important things in terms of evolutionary biology is to kill the stuff on our food that we can't see. Like in terms of bacteria, fungi, parasites, the microscopic stuff on our food that ain't pretty to think about, but it's there. And that's why there's a reason that once something enters your mouth, it goes down your esophagus, the first digestive organ it goes into is a giant vat of acid, because that vat of acid is supposed to kill anything that could otherwise create problems if it were to go into the duodenum, jejunum, ileum, onward from there. It's supposed to be killed there. So then you have this like big window opening of like a lot of things happening at the same time, right? So first of all, I was stressed, which made this happen. So that's already a problem. That's by itself. Step one was a problem. Step two, now I'm not actually breaking down my protein efficiently. So that's going to impact recovery and ultimately that keyword, adaptation. Step three, I've got now this acid reflux that's going to impact my sleep quality. That's going to impact testosterone, recovery, nervous system function, the whole deal. And now step four, I am at a greater risk for pathogenic infiltration from parasites, bacteria, or fungi. That can take me out of fight camp. That can take me out of the gym. Or it could be mildly symptomatic and just be something I consider common over time. And I don't ever really deal with it. But over time, I'm operating at about 90% of my genetic potential rather than 100% of my genetic potential. But then when you combine all of those symptoms, that's a major stressor, my man. And that's just like one small example that ends up rippling itself into the small things that someone like me has to care about. Yeah, you're going to have people out there that's like, you just have to hit your calories and macros. That's what covers all the bases. You don't coach pro athletes, do you? You don't, because anybody who does would never say something like that. It is not as simple as energy balance and macronutrients. That's wildly important. There's no denying that. But I do very much consider that 101. That's like almost obvious. To move into 201 and 301 and get that 1%, 91%, 92% of your potential, 93%, 94%. That's when all of these small things, there's no little things when it comes to $100 million. Little things are big things.
Now, part of that you mentioned specific nutrition and strategies around brain and brain health, which I think is where you've kind of really carved out a name. And in a sport that is, I mean, so ripe and open for controversy around the long-term effects, right? Like there was obviously the NFL had its, and not to say it doesn't have its issues now, but you know, the concussion movie back in the day really shone some light on some less than favorable practices. And, you know, even the game of ice hockey has changed since we were kids. Like Scott Stevens can't step over the blue line and kill Paul Kariya anymore, because there's just too much residual. As a Canadian, I know you get that reference, which is tremendous.
Oh yeah, man.
I don't get Canadians on the show very often.
Yeah.
But obviously mixed martial arts, the whole game is like, can I give this guy dementia in 25 minutes? Like if I can give him dementia in 25 minutes, I win. what are the approaches? What are the markers? What are the considerations? What are the concerns, especially when we come to cutting weight?
Cutting weight. Okay, so cutting weight, that's a whole kind of box to open all by itself. And let's not forget Scott Stevens on Eric Lindros. That was gnarly.
Lindros deserved it. Just saying. Not a Lindros fan. Sorry, Eric.
Crossing with his head down. Scott Stevens will make you pay every single time.
God bless.
Yeah. But yeah, dude, in terms of that weight cut, so weight cutting is sanctioned cheating in a way, because if you know how to do it right, it is a massive advantage. The problem is you'd be amazed at how many people still take a stupidly dumb scientific approach, like non-scientific rather, approach to it, to where they're just spitting in the cup, they're getting in the sauna, they're dehydrating on frickin' Monday, and my guys are only dehydrating Thursday night. They're weighing in Friday morning. They're not eating, almost like they're fasting so soon. And like when it comes to anything in physiology, I would say this statement, but I especially mean this when it comes to weight cutting. And it goes, if you force the body, it'll react. But if you coax the body, it will respond. That statement runs true in almost all areas of biology. If you force the body, it'll react. If you coax the body, it'll respond. If you do these dumb strategies way too early in your weight cut, your body freezes and wants to hold on to all of that weight because you're doing too aggressive strategies too soon. However, if you're somebody who brings this thing out physically, there are certain points at which certain boxes you want to check across time, and then slowly build into your system. So like further out, typically, depending on where the athlete's weight is at, and how big they are for their weight class, which they can be massive, either like 10, 9, 8, or 7 days out, that's when you'd start not completely pulling carbs, but pretty much. I mean, you're pulling out a lot of them at that point. Now, the distinction is that that's not calories, that's carbs. I like to just kind of swap out carbs for fats during that phase to get a massive glycogen dump, because we're not training a lot in fight week anyways. That's media, that's interviews, that's travel time. And at that point, you're as good shape as you're going to be. You're not developing more power at that point. You're not developing more conditioning at that point. At that point, it is just to kind of relax, let the nagging injuries fall away, and then just do some pad work, some strategy, some things that you want to just keep in muscle memory at that time, but it's breaking the lightest sweat possible and then getting out of there, because inflammation by itself is water retentive. Like some fighters, not only are they doing extreme stuff too soon, but they're also still trying to train hard because they think that's going to drop their weight. But inflammation's water retentive. So they're actually retaining this thing from trying to do this intense hit session of cardio that they have in their brain that works for them, that just simply doesn't if they took a better approach. So early out, it's the intention that camp is actually over 1 week out. It doesn't extend to fight day. It's over 1 week out. We're going to begin to pull carbs. We're going to lose quite a bit of weight in glycogen alone. We're going to allow that process to kind of marinate, because you will continue to drop weight. My fighters are holding a lot of glycogen because I'm a pretty carb dominant coach all fight camp long. And then once we're getting into later on, like getting into, let's say if they're weighing in on a Friday, we're typically going to water load them for a few days. And this is going to disrupt something known as the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. A lot of people have read about it before. This is something that if you essentially water load for an extended period of time, then your body is actually going to alter this antidiuretic hormone to continue flushing a ton of water out of your system in a natural way that has nothing to do with the sauna and has everything to do with you just peeing more. So if I can load this athlete's water up Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I'm going to pull it on Thursday, he's going to keep peeing as if he was water loading, even though he's not water loading, because it takes over 24 hours for that hormone to realize you're not drinking water anymore. So I will cut their water down by into 1/10 of what they were having in that time on Thursday. And that's basically just sips with meals. so that they can have something to keep their mouth wet and have something so their mouth isn't cotton mouth during all the interviews and stuff like that, and just so they can digest more efficiently. But he's gonna pee like a motherfucker all Thursday, and that's what I would refer to as the second passive strategy. Glycogen is passive weight loss because we're not forcing it. Water loading is passive weight loss because we're not forcing it. And when I say force, I mean hot bath or sauna, something like that. And then we're also going to do sodium manipulation too. I'm going to give him more sodium, and I'm going to pull that as well. And then that's going to allow for even more water to be lost naturally, because now we're manipulating water, but we're also manipulating electrolytes. You can incorporate as well some laxatives like Miralax, just to help get rid of any type of GI residue that might still be in there. You're gonna get another 2-3 pounds just out of that. So then we'll have some form of Miralax or something in there. The Super Dieter's Tea is another one, but you can have something like that as well. And then moving into Thursday is something I call Whoosh Day, because Whoosh Day is when all of these things, all of the passive strategies are happening at the same time. The sodium manipulation, the GI residue loss, the glycogen loss has been fully depleted at this point in time. And then on top of that, like, this is when we can finally see where the weight is at and how much sauna we're even going to need. And he's eating the whole time still. We're still having proteins. We're still having fruit. We're still having healthy fats. These things are still in there, which is unheard of in the fight world. A lot of guys just simply starve themselves, and that's what leads to a lot of issues. And then Thursday night, Whoosh Day has already dominated a ton of that weight passively, where my fighters do absolutely nothing. And then Thursday night before bed, we might do, and this is where you kind of want to taper in the degree of stress. So something like some bike work with some sweet sweat on and in sweatshirts, that's going to be a lower stress event. And then you could increase the stress a bit more after that by getting in the hot tub. And then the one that you kind of want to stay a little bit more away from, but you use it if you need to, is the sauna, because that would be considered most systemically stressful. So you're kind of linearly bringing in the stress only on an as needed basis. And then before bed, we're not going to be on weight. It's another major mistake fighters make, is they'll be on weight before bed. And I want my fighters on weight for like an hour, 45 minutes. So we're going to actually go to bed. You're still going to have, say, 5 pounds to go. And then what's going to happen is you're still going to lose another 1 to 2, because we already know your predicted night weight loss. We know that from camp. We also know that from previous fights. So I already know, based on your unique physiology, you're going to lose, say, 1.8 pounds, just as an example. I know you're going to lose that just overnight. So then we're not going to do that in sauna. You're just going to lose that overnight. And then in the morning, you're going to do one more quick session to get on weight right before you leave to go to the fighter's hotel. You're going to be on weight for 45 minutes, and then you are going to immediately begin to rehydrate and refuel. So your dehydration process was largely passive. We only used active methods when we absolutely needed to, and you were maximally dehydrated for as short a time as possible. So things like the body, brain, KO power, conditioning don't take the same type of hit, and you ate your meals the entire way through. There's, of course, like a lot of science and very specific electrolyte calculations and water manipulation that needs to be done in that framework. But that is a framework that I operate on quite a bit in order to get athletes to really maximize this. And just to kind of add a last nail in the coffin here, fighters will talk about your weight cut, taking away your conditioning, and taking away your KO power. O'Malley actually set a UFC record for most punches thrown in a 3-round fight. So his weight cut is not impacting his conditioning, and the world already knows that it's not impacting his KO power. So this is something that's working very well for him, that is just purely based on science and experience with my boy.
So I have some very firsthand experience in cutting weight in the sport of powerlifting, which is I'm remiss to even call it a sport. And science was not featured in any of this. No, I mean, not to my thing, because you show up in a powerlifting meet. It's obviously, Dana White was never at any of my meets, which I was a little offended by. But
yeah, that's weird.
You see the approach post weigh in at a powerlifting meet, and me having a very pedestrian understanding of science would laugh at the common approaches of the amateur or even professional powerlifters, What is okay? So we've walked from the 10-day out mark, end of technical camp, into the media week, the passive 3 methods of weight loss, the whoosh day where it's all happening sort of contemporaneously. You get them on the scale. We nailed it, 45 minutes to an hour at peak dehydration. What does then between that and the bell ringing to start the first round look like?
So you're essentially going to not freaking eat whatever you want. Holy shit. So fighters feel like that they won the fight once they weighed in, and like after they weigh in, it's like, let's go to the buffet, man. Let's go to a restaurant. Hey, there's this new sponsor that wants to get with us. We should do a business lunch with them. No, 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 and no. If I show up, we're going right back to the fucking hotel, and we are going to eat what you ate during camp, because we already know that agrees with your gastrointestinal system. It's so insane to me, the oversight there. It's like, okay, the day before the biggest fight of my life, I'm going to go eat something I've never ate before. What? Like, fucking what? It's so insane to me. And then it's like, what? I have got bubble guts right now. I've got gas. I've got diarrhea. You're so sensitive to diarrhea when you're rehydrating and refueling. That's a massive problem in fighting. So essentially what you're going to do in the first hour, it's a lot of liquid nutrition, a lot of very easily digestible proteins, amino acids, electrolytes, carbohydrates, little concoctions that I like to put together that are in unique ratios to really get that first hour where they're going to take in a ton of nutrients and then not shit them out. That's like it's a huge goal and something that's actually a finesse process. But I get my fighters take in a ton of nutrients and they feel amazing, even just within the first hour. But then after that, I like to do very small meals at a high frequency. So the analogy that I like to give to my fighters is, you want to imagine your stomach like a gas tank, and it should always be half full. So you should never feel full, but you should also not feel hungry. What we want is a half full gas tank all the way up to the cage, all the way up until you're a cage walk. We're just maintain that sweet flow. That first hour, they're starving and very thirsty. So they're smashing. I'll have them have a very specific shake immediately after the scale, and you drink that as fast as you can. And then I'll have them have another shake, but I make them make it last until the 30-minute mark. And then I give them their third shake, and I make them make that one last from 30 to 60 minutes. So we get those 3 in, and 1 hour has passed. We have 3 major shakes that are built for them to suffice the post-weigh-in needs. And then after that, we're going low fiber, low fat meals, because those slow the uptake of digestion. And we're going to go so it's low fiber, low fiber, low fat. But then we have clean and easily digestible carbs and proteins that they ate during camp, but in still smaller quantities. So almost 0 fiber, 0 fat, and then small quantities of proteins and carbs, typically once every 1 to 2 hours on an as needed basis to maintain your half full gas tank. And in between, I'm a fan of snacks. So you can snack on carb only stuff in between meals, because there's a certain comfort associated to it. I want them to have their GI system to be good. I also want them to continue eating. So if it's something that I do agree with, and that it's in a quantity that is agreeable, that I know is not going to create any gastrointestinal distension or anything like that, something like oatmeal, something like baby food, oatmeal, baby food, little bits of fruit. These are all things that are permissible in between meals, but then your actual meals are just like your basic chicken, rice, that kind of thing, something that you were eating during camp. We're going to rock that out all the way until about, say, an hour before the fight. And then if the athlete wants anything immediately pre-fight, then that's going to be on an individualistic basis. But that's essentially what it's going to look like. And people will be shocked. And Sean's talked about this before, so I'm not like giving away information that he'd be uncomfortable with. So he, it was a fight ago, he was 135 at 9 a.m. on Friday. And then at 5 p.m. on Friday, he was 158. Going from 135 to 158 that day with no diarrhea or gastrointestinal upset at all. So that's why I kind of call it sanctioned cheating if you know what you're doing, because you can go in there with all your conditioning, all your KO power, and be a big boy for that weight class.
You mentioned two things. You mentioned the last meal before the fight kind of having a preferential slant to the fighter. And you also mentioned the role of carbohydrates having somewhat of a comfort factor. Now, never dealing specifically in the nutrition space with athletes. And it's always been, for me, somewhat of a point of contention, at the very least, to get them to a professional like you. Have you ever run into preferences around, because food is tough, right? Like training, I find much less pushback because training has a direct utility to it. Like we're not addicted to our training methods because we don't need our training methods to survive. You need food and drink to survive. Like I remember I was in the gym once with Chad Johnson, now currently known as Chad Ocho Cinco. And I was training an athlete, and he told that athlete that all the guy needed to do was eat McDonald's for every meal. And I was like, Ocho, time to go. Like, I don't know what the specific electrolyte ratio that this kid needs. That's why I have your cell phone number. But I just know that Ocho's got to get the fuck out of my ear right now. And I was like, Let's expand on this. It's like, Chad, he goes, I ate it all during my prime. I was like, okay, let's explore this idea for a minute. How long was your prime in the NFL? And he goes, 8 years. I'm like, what's the average career length of an NFL football player? He had, it's about 3.5 to 4 years, depending on your position. He has a prime that was double the amount, and he swore it was due to McDonald's. And, I've heard stories of guys that they try and get off 4 or 5 cans of Coke a day. Phil Kessel is one that comes to mind, NHL player, loved cans of Coke, and they pulled it off 6 games into one season. They had him on no Coke. And then between periods, he gets all pissed off, drinks a Coke, and goes out and scores a hat trick the next period. It's like, have you ever run into the psychology trumping the physiology? Because, we talk about the physiology never lies, but man, athletes are nuts, bro.
Bro, that's what I'm talking about. That's the answer to this question. Is psychology is as important as physiology. So that's why scientists typically aren't good coaches. That's why coaching and being a scientist, they're different disciplines entirely. They need to work together. Science is very reductionistic. So we need to learn that stuff in order to push the boundaries. It's very reductionistic in terms of certain metabolic pathways, certain enzymes, learning about new sequences. These things are great, but very reductionistic. Whereas a coach is applying things in the real world that actually works. So it's like, we need reductionism to move the industry forward, but we need holism to make sure things remain relevant. Reductionism and holism, that is coaching and science 101. The way in which you can marry that is the way in which you're going to be able to benefit your athlete. So if somebody says, hey, you can't have this food, I would say, you've never coached a pro athlete, have you? Because you can actually, on paper, your pregame meal might be more beneficial for the athlete. But because of psychology, you ended up ruining their performance. So to stay, we're talking about Kessel, and we brought up some hockey references. Why don't we just stay in that world and talk about Sidney Crosby? Sidney Crosby is very, very well known to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich before the game. And he's been known by many to be the number one hockey player for a long time. There's other people there now, guys like Connor McDavid and stuff like that. But Crosby is regarded as a phenomenal hockey player, regardless, right? If I were to come in there and say, hey, Crosby, look, you're the number one hockey player for a long time, but you're doing it wrong. I would sound like a complete moron in the world of coaching, and everyone would say, you're a scientist, aren't you? Because I could actually give Crosby a different pregame meal, and he could perform worse, even though my meal was on paper better, because I have taken him out of his ritual. And holy shit, our athletes ritualistic, pulling us back into the octagon. George St. Pierre, he's going to sprint from one end of the octagon, he's going to sprint to the other, and then he's going to bounce in the corner. Anderson Silva, he's going to open his arms up and he's going to bounce off the back of the cage and then look forward. John Jones, he's going to crawl into the octagon and then he's going to get up. These are environmental and physical cues to get someone into a state of flow. If you fuck their flow up, you fucked their entire performance up. And you can do that in nutrition. So I'm right there with you, dude. You got to be the tree that bends with the wind. Optimize where you can, gain trust with the athlete as things progress on. And if you do that in a logical and progressive way, they will continue to trust you more and more and more and let you into their weird world of rituals. You may never be allowed in that world, but if you do enough right things, you'll be in that world, and you may just be able to make a few changes.
What are some of the concessions where you're like, on paper, this is nuts, but don't fuck with it? Like, where, like, what are the ones you've really had to wrestle with and be like, yo, this guy just likes to have, like a Marlboro Red and a shot of Jack Daniels before he goes out. You just got to let him do it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that tennis player, you should tell him just to eat McDonald's every day. That's all you got.
Oh yeah, sure. You know what? He'd be headed for that. I think he would like that now. That's probably what I haven't been around in a couple of months, so I think that's probably what he's doing over in Australia.
I've had a look at your blood work, and I think that you just need McDonald's every day. Like, I think that's
Dr. Ocho Cinco reporting.
Hell yeah, dude. Let's get him on here. No, so like the hard stuff, I actually don't deal with a lot of that anymore, thankfully. I don't know, like, if it's the position that I've got myself in, but athletes typically come to me ready to listen now. And if any athlete is not ready to listen, my little ace in the hole is blood work. Because blood work doesn't lie. So like sometimes they may be doing something and it's actually fine. Like, and we may know from study X, Y, and Z that it's not going to be good for them or whatever. But we know physiologies are different, man. People have different cultures. People have different, my golden retriever is getting excited for this one. People have different cultures. They have different microbiomes. They have different stress. They have different sleep. They have different hormones. They have different neurotransmitters. They have different genetics. Like, man, I believe nutrition is more in its infancy than people like to admit, especially experts like to admit. Like, those things, I just gave, like, I think 7 or so reasons as to why people are really freaking different. So, like, I'm not always wildly opposed to somebody having a weird quirk, so long as it's not impacting their lab work. If it's impacting your lab work, then I'm able to say, hey, objectively, this is going to reduce your recovery. Objectively, you are not going to reach your potential. Are you willing to change? They're like, well, yeah. Yeah, because it's a big part of the facilitation of change that I've found over my coaching career is that when you use blood work, for example, it's no longer my philosophy that they're following. It's their own physiology that they're following. So they're way more agreeable to it because it's like, oh, that's actually what my body wants and needs right now. It's not just Coach Garner trying to fit me into this square box when I'm a circle. It's so different when you bring up the objectivity of lab work, and it's really just avoided those problems for me, man. I really don't deal with that much at all anymore.
Do you feel like a lot of that is just evolution of, strength conditioning and the importance of nutrition around performance? Like, we talk about Sidney Crosby and on the obvious, LeBron, Michael, Crosby, Gretzky. It's like, yeah, Gretzky played in a different era. If Gretzky were to play now, how would he suit up against Connor Bedard or McDavid or Crosby or, some of the up and coming kids? Because Gretzky played against plumbers, right? Like, there's guys in the NHL that's, you can go to a beer league.
Bob Provert's a real athlete.
Hey,
all right?
Windsor, Ontario, proud. Probert worked out at the Good Life Fitness that I worked at. May he rest. Yeah, may he rest in peace. His funeral procession was a block away from my house. Bob was a local Windsor legend. Dude, hands on him like you wouldn't believe. Dude, the guy, I've never seen like just such cinder blocks for hands, man. God. Yeah, Proby's a local legend. But I mean, all things considered, now fighters in the league, you got to be scoring 20 goals a year at least if you're going to get a look, right? The idea of the East Coast League tough guy coming into the fourth line NHL is like, that doesn't really exist anymore. This is how much of like, those John Daly-esque. Oh, geez. Yeah. R.I.P. Donald Brashear, man. We could just do a hockey podcast, I think. Dude, nobody gets it. Dude, that was so bad. That was on TV. Assault. That was nuts.
That was assault.
Assault with a deadly weapon. Yeah. Especially back then, because he wasn't used. That was a one piece like sheer wood. He wasn't swinging around some composite thing with 75 flex. That was like 120 flex sheer wood to the dome. But you know, there was an era in sport where, you know, it was like John Daly nutrition. It was the equivalent of like Goldberg giving nutrition advice to Julie the Cat Gaffney and just like carb loading her with donuts and shit. Like, you know, John Daly's classic quote is like, in kind of response to Tiger Woods like straining his back, and John goes like takes a drag of a dart and looks around, sips a Bud Light, and goes like, "You can't pull fat," and walks away with the most epic mic drop of all time. It's like how much of the, you know, obviously the results speak for themselves, kind of as you said off the jump, but how much of it now is like athletes know what's at stake, and they know that, you know, the other guy is going to not be smoking Marlboro Reds and sipping a Bud Light, that, you know, you're going to war quite literally in mixed martial arts. Do you think it's just a sign of the change of the times?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think that, the access to information is tremendous now. Like back in the day when you're cage fighting, how many experts do you think they had access to? You know, like it's so low. But now anybody has Instagram. Anybody can follow some people. Anybody can check out YouTube. You can see some stuff and go, damn, I actually have had a lot more muscle soreness lately. It's something you can even Google. Like back in the day, these guys wouldn't even Google this stuff. You'd have to connect to your phone, internet. It would make a lot of weird noises for 30 seconds. It would load the page you want for another 60 seconds, and just shit took forever. So like, I think a lot of it could be access to information. And now that people have access to information, more people applied that information and they got the benefits of that information. And then that spreads like wildfire in the world of athletes. It's like, it's not necessarily the information that spreads like wildfire with athletes. It's who's getting results. That's results speak louder than anything in the world of athletics. And that's why you'll see them do a lot of different weird stuff, because like whatever they feel like is working for them, they don't really care what is getting results. And that over time, the dissemination of information and the generation of new information has led to just more and more results. So you see that in the competitive landscape. But then you also just have to understand that like the examples you and I are talking about, like with McSorley and them, like we're talking 20 years ago, you know, a lot, like long. And then there's athletes like way older than that, right? In 2023, your margin for error is so small. Like how, like in the Olympics, when you're a 100-meter sprinter, like how fast can a human run? Like how much faster can we run? How much better of a hockey player can you be than like McDavid and Bedard? Like how much better of a fighter can somebody be than John Jones? Like these characters, there's no margin for error anymore. So as we continue to push the limits of genetic potential, I feel like the stuff that people think that I talk about that is like weird and niche right now is the stuff that these athletes have to do in order to continue to get 1 more percent and 1 more percent and 1 more percent. Because if you don't apply that information, you're just simply not going to ever be the best ever or a world champion or the make it to the Hall of Fame. 2023 is too unforgiving for that. You need to utilize as many tools as possible in order to be the best version of yourself.
Have you come across things that are scientifically sound that are inapplicable? Like, is there a bookend to science's applicability? Like, and that speaks more from kind of maybe my world around like the biomechanics and strength training, where it's like there are basic tenets and principles you have to follow. There are things that, you know, from a personalization level, pre-existing injuries and things like that, you know, task dependent to the sport, things that you need to consider. But at a certain point, there's a level of nuance, and it's almost like you can't force too many things through that stimulus response adaptation window. That like the big rocks will always be the big rocks, and frankly, in a 20-week off season, fuck, if you go deep in the NHL, in a fucking 16-week, 12-week off season in some cases before you're back into camp, it's like you just don't have enough time.
Yeah.
You mentioned that nutrition's kind of in its infancy. Do you think that we'll ever come to a point where like we're coming across science or principles or methods or techniques that are like, guys, we've gone too far?
Yeah, I think so. I think the science is phenomenal at identifying trends, but not very good at predicting individual reactions. There are trends that you can beautifully paint across everybody, which are the big rocks: calories, macronutrients, micronutrients, nutrient timing, stress management, sleep quality, inflammation management. Like there are things that you can across the board, these things do need to be applied. But just because science is phenomenal at predicting trends among populations, is not always the best at predicting individual reactions with people. You'll see the weirdest things in lab work. And you'll see the weirdest things when you're working with that kind of 1%er population that just shock the hell out of you. Like I went to in 2016, I went to Southern California. No, it was 2015. I went to Southern California as this coach contacted me. He's like, hey, I have 10 NHL athletes and 10 NFL athletes. Can you come down here and help me run them through their off season? And I was like, yeah, let's rock. So then I flew to Southern California. I was there in Irvine for months. And it was crazy, man. So there's 10 NFL and 10 NHL. And then there was an NHL player, and he was a Leaf. I won't be able to say his name. He was a Leaf, but his body weight was in the 170s. Okay. He had by far the strongest grip strength there. He had stronger grip strength than O-linemen of NFL players that were there. And there was a phenomenal linebacker. He played inside and outside linebacker, and he won the Super Bowl with me with the Patriots. And this NHL player's grip strength was wildly stronger than all of these guys. And you would never, ever predict that in your life. And he had barely ever trained grip strength, ever. He just had these freaking mitts on him, like you're talking like with Bob Probert. He had just these ridiculous mitts on him and a rifle for a shot. So then it made sense. Like this stuff makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense. Science would say no right now, and it sounds unbelievable. But I saw this thing, and you'll see a bunch of that working with athletes. So I think that you can't be too science-based, because then you're a scientist, and if you're a scientist, then you focus on science and not art. And if you're not focusing on the art, then you're missing 50% of getting results.
So coming off of kind of sticking on like the chronological theme of the fight, they come out and new, world champion, bantamweight, Sean? Did I got that right?
Yeah.
Where is there leniency? Is there a desire for leniency? Like, what does that night into the next week look like? Like, are there diet breaks? Like, coming out of the fitness world, people would coin a phrase like cheat meals. Like, are you going to the Cheesecake Factory? Like, is there room for leniency? Obviously, like, the over optimization leads to less adaptability over time, right? There's a fragility that's inextricably linked to the hyper optimization, right? Because there's an inability to tolerate less and less, or more and more things, an inability to tolerate more and more things. Is there strategy coming out of the octagon from a nutritional standpoint, or is some of it just like, hey, the physiology, like, dude just won, he's top of the world, let him go have X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, man. So the strategy is that there's no strategy. Like it's very minimal. Like, my man just won a world title that he's been working for so many and sacrificed so many years. Like, no, Sean, you can't have beers tonight. Nah, man, I want you to get in sleep. And then we're going to wake up and we're going to look at the sun and we're going to do some journaling. We're going to do a gratitude. Like, fuck all that, man. Go party, dude. And go party for a week. I don't care. Like I really don't. That's my preference, to be honest. And I'll join him. I'll one up that.
Yeah,
I'll join him.
That's my preference up there.
Yeah, that's my real preference. Yeah.
First round on Dan.
Yeah. 100%. I'll be that guy for a lot of reasons. Number one, he earned it. And number two, I think that the over optimization can actually lead to injuries. So I actually want my fighter starting fight camp about 80% in shape. Because if he starts fight camp 100% in shape, then we don't have anywhere to go. You can't just keep pushing. If you're already in shape for 5-minute rounds and you're 12 weeks out, you're only going to overtrain from here. So I actually want you kicking off camp around 80%. And because what got you down to 80% probably also healed all of your nagging injuries, allowed your knuckles, the swelling to come down from the past fight, allowed your wrists, your knees, your foot, your shins. A lot of things are just naturally going to hurt. Not to mention your brain needs a break from that as well. So you've just been in a war, you've been in the cage, and even short fights. Like, people don't understand. Like, if you're in there for a fight and it's only 3 minutes long, but it was a banger, you are leaving there with some damage. Like that's how hard these guys throw requires recovery of mind and body, and not just mind in terms of, say, brain health. I mean, just go relax, dude. You were just disciplined like a samurai for 12 weeks. So you need to just go not do any of that stuff for a little bit. Go take a break. I'm going to set your meal prep up just to give you maybe lunches throughout the week so that you have a nice healthy lunch every day. I know that we're getting some high quality protein in there. I know that we're getting high quality micronutrients in there, but get up and have breakfast with your family. And then also have whatever your wife is making for dinner tonight. Don't focus on my dinner. Don't do any of that stuff. And then naturally, like lots of times when you give these kind of athletes that kind of freedom, they sort of self-select pretty good foods anyways. They don't eat and weigh, they don't weigh and measure, but they eat healthy. They just they're choosing healthy things that they feel like are good for them. And then when they want to get a little snacky, maybe, something's going on and then they wanted a burger or they wanted chips or whatever, do that. And then I'm going to hit you up in 2-3 weeks. And then we'll start to kind of get back into it from there, because there's probably, if you're at a fight frequency of 3 fights per year, that's pretty high. If it's 4 fights per year, then you're just 12 week. But if you take a 2-3 week break here, then you come back into camp about 80% in shape or so. That's actually perfect, because you're entering camp with a lot of room to grow, with no injuries at all, and a psychologically refreshed mind to be a disciplined samurai again.
You mentioned earlier that when you got into coaching, you're like, a PhD, and I think it was Pollock that said that when he first realized that no one listened to him because he didn't have 20-inch arms. So he's like, well, he just went out and had 20-inch arms till the day he died. Rest in peace. You seem to be sometimes coaches have a hard time taking their own advice. You've got the results now, man. Why are you always so shredded now? Just let it go. You got the title. Dude, just lay back and live off the interest, homie. You're inside out. You seem to be getting in better shape than your fighters.
I see it as part of my job description, to be honest. I see it, if my athletes, if I expect them to do wild shit, then I better do wild shit. I do. And that's kind of that removing of immunological insults to maximize adaptation is why someone with shitty genetics like me, I've been able to do some cool stuff. In a year, in your powerlifting world, it's not impressive, but I benched 405 and then I ran a full marathon and then I got bodybuilding lean. So I was able to kind of do that inside of 1 year with a newborn daughter while building a new business. So I was like, you know what? I need to actually prove my own shit if I'm going to apply it to others. And I should be able to apply it even to a bad physiology from a genetic perspective. Sorry, Dad. But he'll listen to this for sure. But someone without gifts should be able to still do some really good stuff if the coaching is there. So I appreciate you saying that, man. But to be honest, I do consider that just a part of my job description. And it's a little bit it's kind of surprising if anybody doesn't do that, unless they're coaching demographic, unless they're coaching people to not get results. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe that's their demographics. Well, that person's taking it easy, so if I hire them, they can take it easy. But I don't think if anybody hires me, I think they know in advance he's not going to take it easy on me. That guy seems wild. He posts weird shit on Instagram and he's always doing something. He's waking up at every hour of the night. I think that I've sort of self-selected my demographic that way. And I want to lead from the front in the best way that I can in that sense.
Now, in the interest of that, upcoming, obviously just going off a big dub in the UFC fight, what's kind of in the cards for you, no pun intended, on the work side of things, on the business side of things, what's coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I'm always working with different athletes. So we're always getting ready for something. So a lot of that's going on the back end, but something that I'm really most excited about right now is scaling what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about is not scalable. That's been a big problem of mine. It's hey, Garner, I want to work with you, man. Can you have a look at my lab work? And I want to do that for everybody, but it's so time intensive. So that means it has to be more expensive, which means that it's because I have a family to take care of. I'm going to spend hours on one person. It just has to be worth more for me to keep doing it. So then it has not been scalable from a pricing perspective. So what I've done And I want this to be my legacy. I really think this is going to be my contribution to science in the industry. Is I've created a lab interpretation software. So what I essentially wanted it to be was a second brain. So if I wanted data scientists to mine my brain and turn it into an algorithm. Every time I look at blood work and the outputs for lifestyle, training, nutrition, supplementation, that gets extrapolated out of my head over and over and over and over and over again with the human touch, but also machine learning. And we just really freaking dial this thing in. And then I'm calling it my second brain, because if I'm fresh, if I've had my coffee, if I've had nootropics, if I've had a good night's sleep, and I'm looking at a lab, I'm going to knock that thing out. But I want a lab interpretation software so good that I could have pulled an all-nighter, had no breakfast and no coffee yet. But my lab interpretation software does just as good of a job. That's what I mean by second brain. It is mimicking the optimal version of my science and art algorithmic approach to the outputs that I get from lab work. So that thing is, it's taken so much work, but good things take time. And that's going to be ready in January 2024. I'm very, very excited about it.
That's gnarly, man. Love to hear it. It's always tough pulling guys out of the gym and into like a dev team to get that stuff done. But when we could do it and we could sit them down for long enough, it's good things tend to happen.
Yeah. It's been fascinating too, dude. And it's in its own lane, because this is 100% performance based. So this is not like optimizing and leaning into this longevity thing. It's not optimizing or leaning into disease. No, this is brain performance and muscular performance. You point that in the direction you want, because performance to me is self-descriptive. If you're a CEO, or if you're an artist, or if you're an athlete, or if you're just someone who has some wild goals, this is something where you're going to be able to use performance as the main driver of any kind of biomarker output that we're going to be using. So it's its whole entire focus, and I'm going narrow with it. People who want to perform the best, this is the algorithmic approach to it.
I love it, because I'm getting really sick of boomers talking about longevity, and because frankly, I want them to either go away faster or die sooner. So I'm glad. It's always nice to talk to people who are performance centric in their approach, man. I really appreciate you taking the time and coming to hang. And like I said, back up the 401 now. So if you ever find yourself up in Toronto, we'll have to put some of the performance talk to the test, and we'll start bending some tin and get together in person.
Bro, let's get some McDonald's. Let's train.
Yes. Yeah. I'll call up Chad. Yeah, for sure. Dude, the next scene would me just be like asleep in the corner. Like how you eat a McDouble and then go run 1,000 yards in a season. Oh man. Well, anyways, dude, I appreciate your time, man, so much. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity, brother. This is fun.
Appreciate it.